Good evening, everyone. So today I will explain mainly the 103 BPCC 103, and the topics are the differences between the Indian and the Western psychology, and as well as the next unit of this block, that is the motivation and the creativity. So this is the last unit of this 103. uh, to uh, the first unit, that is the unit 7, which I'm going to explain today at first. So, in this unit, mainly the modern scientific psychology that originated in the Western cultural context is governed by some materialist worldwide and reductionist paradigm. So, a worldwide provides a perspective on the nature of the reality, and which in turn it creates certain assumptions and limiting the statements on what exists and what is possible and what goals can be achieved. So, from them, the nature of the universe of man, life, and existence as such, of mind, etc., are defined. Now, this has implications for the development. This has the implications for the development of the knowledge in any discipline. Now, in psychology, this has limited its scope of inquiry to a narrow range of human experiences and possible through sensory channels. The second, that is, the mind and consciousness, are used interchangeably. So, nature of mental activity is limited to the specific processes governed by the intellect. So, man is viewed primarily as an animal, and human behavior as a whole is considered to be determined by biological and social factors. So, in contrast to the Western psychology, the Indian psychology is governed by some spiritual worldwide. Now, it proclaims that consciousness is primary, no matter, and a distinction is made between the consciousness and the mind. Now, human beings are viewed as potentially divine, and the goal life of is to realize the divinity within. Now, all other goals and motivations of life are concerned as subsidiary and secondary. So, in Indian psychology, the mental activities include the intuitive processes. It is possible to have a wide range of experiences beyond the sensory realm, but all such experiences are not viewed as ultimate. So, realizing a state beyond all of them, the pure consciousness, is considered the most important and the ideal of human life. So, within this framework, human behavior is understood. So, there is a wide difference between the Indian psychology and the Western thoughts of psychology, and the Indian psychology is very much rich because uh, there are some evidences of like the Indian psychological Vedas from Bhagavad Gita. We can easily see that what are the main ideas that are given in Indian psychology. So these terms are mainly taken from the Indian philosophy and how it is related with the Western philosophy and later on the psychological aspects. So this is what this unit actually contains. That means what are the differences and what are the relationships between the Western thoughts of psychology and the Indian thoughts of psychology. Now, indigenous psychology, it actually focuses on the culture as the source of ideas, whereas Indian psychology, it mainly emphasizes the Indian perspective of human life and other aspects of behavior. So it highlights the uniqueness of Indian culture and traditions. Now, in Indian psychology, karma, that is, it means or it rather consists of certain tendencies, the impressions, and habit patterns that results from the accumulation of actions performed in one particular lifetime. So it was beautifully described in Indian psychology. So, in this unit, mainly this type of differences and relationships are there. Now, another like karma, moksha was also defined in Indian psychology. Now, what does this moksha mean? It is called the liberation or breaking the cycle of birth and death. So this is just a cycle of birth and death. It goes on and which keeps going because of the cumulative karma of several lifetimes. So this was the main uh, thing of this unit, and the next unit, it mainly covers about the motivation and the creativity part. Now in this unit, um, I have already covered about the intelligence, what are the main theories of intelligence. uh, Likewise, this is another important uh, um, unit where the motivation and this creativity, which are the two important um, functions of psychology, it mainly covers. Now, before that, the one thing I have to tell you, that is the specific meaning of the terms used by Padma Pada, or to describe the different conditions of jiva, which was described in Indian psychology. Now, jiva, it means the soul, and purusha, it means the human being, whereas sariri or shariri, it is the one who is embodied. Now this pratyagatma means the self as Brahman, and karta means the self as agent, bhokta means the self as experiencer or enjoyer or sufferer, and this Samprashada means the self sense present in the dream. So, this were the main meaning of this Padma Pada, which was described, where the different conditions of Jiva were beautifully described. Now, there were some development of self and identity as per Indian traditions. Now, that mainly covers with that means the Jagrat. Now, what is this Jagrat mean? Now, the experiencer or the subject who participates in all experiences during the waking state is regarded as the real self. Now, a lay person defines who one is from his or her daily experiences during Jagrat. Now, Jagrat means the waking state of the human being. Now, the this anything experienced in the Jagrat, that means in the waking state, is actually the person who do something, that means the karma. Now, in the Western psychology also, they are very much related with Indian psychology. Now, in contrast, in India, we have a history of several centuries in which hundreds of rishis, muni, yogi, siddha, uh, and such other exceptional people have confirmed and reconfirmed that the range of human experience is not limited to Jagrat state. Now, this the concept of self in relation to Indian family and culture that I told you. Now, the next important unit, I will shift to the next unit, and it covers mainly the motivation and the creativity, which were the two important part of this individual difference. Now, this motivation and creativity, what is the meaning of this word motivation? So I have already covered the theory of motivation. That means the Maslow's hierarchical theory. Um, so first in this unit, I will try to explain you that what is the meaning of the word motivation. Now, motivation has been mainly termed as a factor that drives or pushes one in a certain directions or to behave in a certain way. Now, this motivation, it actually came from a Latin word that means mover. That is mover, which means to move. Now, this then the term motivation has been derived, that I told you, from the Latin word mover. Now, uh, it can thus be described in terms of drive, force, or desires, needs, and wishes that may lead to individuals behaving in a certain manner. Now, this motivation, the term motivation has been defined by various psychologists like Feldman, like Rosenberg, like Quick Nelson, etc., of which one of the most important definition was by Morgan. He defined motivation as a driving and pulling forces which result in persistent behavior directed toward particular goals. Now, the two main things, or the main aspects of this motivations are the needs, the desires, the drives, and the incentives. Now, what is this need? Actually, these are related to the biological states. That means what we actually need to live. That means the water, air, food. Air means oxygen, obviously, and this we need to survive. So these are the biological needs. So, like biological needs, there are some other needs too, like sociological needs, etc. Now, drives. Drive means it is the perceived state of tension that occur when our bodies are deficient in some need, creating an urge to relieve the tension. And incentives, it is the external or is from the environment, and it plays a role in motivating behavior. That means if you give a chocolate and tell a child that if you get a good marks in the exam, then obviously I will give you this chocolate, then obviously that child will be motivated, and that is the incentives. Now, there are some types of motivation. What are they? Number one, the primary and the secondary motivation. The primary motivation can also be termed as the basic motivations, whereas, like the hunger, thirst, sleep, avoidance of any pain, sex, etc. And the second motivation, it actually or includes like the or it can be termed as learned motivation, and these may differ from individual to individual. Now the next type of motivation is the extrinsic and the intrinsic motivation. Now what does this extrinsic motivation mean? It is the motivation that comes from outside the person and usually involves rewards and praises. And the just the opposite, it is the intrinsic motivation. That means, like extrinsic is the external motivation, the intrinsic motivation is the motivation that comes from within a person, and it includes the elements of challenge, enjoyment, mastery, autonomy, etc. Now, what does this challenge mean? It is or it relates mainly to the extent to which an individual enjoys the excitement that accompanies a new challenge. And enjoyment, it relates to the pleasure that an individual may obtain from carrying out any type of task. Now, then, what is mastery? It relates to the sense of pride or uh, accomplishment that an individual may experience when he or she carries out any type of difficult task. Whereas autonomy and self-determination, it relates to the autonomy that an individual enjoys while carrying out the task. And that is the freedom with which the individual can determine what is to be done and how is to be done. Now, these are the main types of motivation. Now, there are some important theories of motivation like the drive reduction theory. Now, this drive theory, it mainly focuses on the needs and drives which we are already discussed in the types of motivation. And this drive reduction theory, it states that the lack of some basic biological need produces a drive to push an organism to satisfy that need. Now, the secondary drives um, are acquired drives arising from previous experiences, or maybe it may be learning. For example, need for achievement in one's field of work or in exam, in academic field. And thus this secondary drive will then channelize the work related behavior of the person. So in this drive theory, an important concept of this theory is homeostasis. Now what is this homeostasis means? It means a balance, the environmental balance and the body balance. Now which can be explained as the process by uh, which can be okay. Shoban Khan, there is a message that, ma'am, how can I contact with you? Now, you please type why you want to contact with me. Okay. So, sorry to interrupt. Mm, Now, I was telling about the drive theory and the homeostasis, right? So, the process by which all organisms work to maintain the physiological equilibrium or balance around an optimal set point, and it can also be explained as the tendency of the body to maintain an internal state that is balanced or steady. Now, after this theory, or the second most important theory of this motivation, is the optimal arousal theory. Now, what is this optimal arousal theory actually mean? Now, this theory, it states that when the arousal level is optimal, people perform better and functions well. So this theory is based on the work carried out by famous psychologists Yerkes and Dodson in 1908. It explains the relationship between arousal level and task performance. Now, this is the second most important theory of motivation. Now, after or in this theory, there are two things that we need to take note of in the context of Yerkes Dodson law. That is, number one, individual differences in the arousal level, and uh, um, number two is the difficulty level of the task. So, first, when we talk of an optimal arousal level leading to better functioning performance, it needs to be noted that this optimal level may vary from person to person. Now, the third important theory of motivation is the incentive theory. Now, in the types of motivation, we have already learned that what is incentive mean. Now, these can also be described as a pull theories. Why? By Morgan and in 1996. Now, these theories actually states that the motivation is a result of desire to achieve the external rewards or incentives. Thus, it can said that both the drive reduction model and the incentive theories are relevant and can be considered together to explain what motivates certain behaviors. So, this was the third important theory of motivation. Then, after that, the fourth important types of motivation or theories of motivation are the cognitive approaches to motivation. Now, what is this cognitive approach? You already know that what is the meaning of this, the term cognitive. So, this approach states that the motivation is a result of people's thoughts, beliefs, expectations, and goals. So, thus, a student will be motivated to study for examination based on his or her expectations, whether studying will lead to obtaining good marks in the examination. So, this theory also helps uh, to differentiate between the intrinsic and the extrinsic motivation. Now, the fifth important theory of this motivation is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So, in this famous theory of motivation, we have already studied in the previous unit. So, he described the hierarchical needs in a pyramid type diagram. That means at the base of the pyramid lies the physiological needs. Now, after fulfilling this physiological needs, the next higher step of this need is the safety and security needs. Now, when we fulfill this type of needs, the next higher step of this need is the love and belongingness needs. When this type of needs are fulfilled, the next higher step of this need is the esteem needs. And at the top of the pyramid is the self actualization. So, this is all about this hierarchy of needs described by Maslow in 1954. And in this theory, he beautifully described the physiological, the biological need, the growth needs, the physiological and the safety needs, the love and belongingness needs, etc. in the pyramid shape diagram. Now, this self actualization need, what is this need mean? It is the highest need, and it is that of self actualization that is related to the need of realization of one's full potential, or can also be termed as the state of self fulfillment. Now, Maslow later on had added a new level of these needs higher than the self actualization, and that is the transcend needs, which refers the findings of the spiritual meaning of life. That means, what are the meaning of the life, why we are living. And it was revised, this theory was revised in 1996, where he included this transcendence needs. Now, after or this the fifth important theory of needs, that is a Maslow's hierarchical need, the sixth important theory is the Alderfer's ERG theory. Now, what does this ERG mean? It means the existence, relatedness, and growth. Now, Alderfer is similar to the theory proposed by Maslow, but he said, or he included, that at the lowest level of the hierarchy is the existence needs. Just the names are different. That is the existence needs. And as the name suggests, that these are the basic needs or the physiological needs. So he included the physiological needs and the safety needs together. And the next is the relatedness needs that are related to the social relationship. Whereas the last level is that of growth needs. And these are related to the need to achieve one's potential, develop competence, and so on. The seventh most important theory of this motivation is the Hertzberg two-factor theory. What are the two main factors described by him? Number one, the hygiene factor, and number two, the motivational factor. Now, it states that satisfaction and dissatisfaction, they actually arise from these two factors. Thus, the opposite of satisfaction is dissatisfaction, that we already know. So these two are the main focuses mentioned in this theory of Hertzberg two-factor theory of motivation. Now, this hygiene factor, it mainly covers the adequate working condition, then proper workload, or good salary in an organization, good relationship with the supervisor and the peers or the subordinates, and obviously the most important one is the security. Whereas the motivational factors, it covers high salary and bonuses in an organization. Number two, achievement and promotion. Three, recognition in an organization. Then responsibility. And at last, the advancement and the growth. That means how to increase the output. So these are the important factors that are included in this hygiene and motivational factors of this theory. Now, the eighth important theory of motivation is the McClelland's acquired needs theory. This theory was developed by David McClelland and it highlights three psychological needs. What are they? Number one, the achievement. Two, the affiliation. And three, power. Now, need for achievement, actually it refers to the need to achieve or excel. Whereas the need for affiliation, it refers to the need to relate with others. Whereas the need to power, it relates to the need to have an influence, impact, and to control others. Now, enhancing the individual potential through intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So, this we have already covered in the types of motivation, that what is intrinsic motivation and what is extrinsic motivation. And now, ways to increase the intrinsic motivation, it actually covers number one, creating challenges. That means in order to intrinsically motivate individuals, they need to be challenged or need to be involved in challenging activities or are given goals that are challenging. Now, the next is the providing autonomy. Now, this autonomy was discussed as one of the components of this intrinsic motivation. So, individuals, they need to provide with autonomy while assigning any type of activities or tasks or goals, so that they can intrinsically motivated to do their best. Now, the next one is the eliciting curiosity. Now, curiosity occurs when something in one's surrounding catches one's attention and the individual wants to know more about it. So, curiosity can be of two types. What are they? The sensory curiosity and the cognitive curiosity. Now, what does the sensory curiosity mean? It elicited when an individual finds something in his or her surrounding that catches his or her attention. Whereas the cognitive curiosity is elicited when an individual feels a need to learn more or gather more knowledge about the activity, object, or event. After that, cooperation. Now, when an individual is given an opportunity to cooperate with others or other individuals or peers, there is a possibility that his or her intrinsic motivation will increase. Then comes the competition. Now, similar to cooperation, even competition with other individuals can lead to increase the intrinsic motivation. So, competition, it provides an opportunity to the individual to compare with others' performance. It may be academic or some other performances, and working towards a greater good or higher purpose. So, when an individual feels that he or she is working for a greater good or higher purpose, then this will also serve as an intrinsic motivator and will enhance the individual's potential to perform. Now, there are some ways to increase the extrinsic motivation also. How? Number one, recognition. Now, this recognition is one of the important factors that can lead to increase this intrinsic motivation. For example, in an organization, an employee can be motivated to perform better when he or she is extrinsically motivated with the help of recognition. Now, number two, the rewards and incentives. So, this is another factor that can lead to increase in motivation. So, any type of rewards, it may be financial, it may be non-financial, it may be praise or anything else. It can enhance the extrinsic motivation. Then comes the punishment. Now, similar to rewards, punishment can also lead to an individual being motivated. Now, fear of being penalized may lead to following of safety behavior by the individual, or a student will prepare his or her homework in time in order to avoid any type of punishment from his or her teacher. Now, another important factor may be the external pressure. This pressure from the significant others in one's lives, like parents, like supervisors, and so on, can also serve as an extrinsic motivator. Now, self-regulation, it is another important factor of this motivation chapter. Now, self-regulation is simple term, can be described as control that one has over oneself. That means self-regulation can be emotional or behavioral. Emotional self-regulation denotes the regulation of one's emotion, whereas behavioral self-regulation, it denotes the behavior that will benefit the individual in long term and is considered with one's values. Now, this self regulation is an important aspect in human being that enables them to sustain in the complex environment that they live in. Now, this self-regulation, the it's stated by Bumister and Bushman in 2008. They said that there are some components of effective self-regulation. What are they? Number one, standards. Now, these standards, it denotes the ideas or concept about how the things could be. So, any individual grows in the context of these standards, and thus one knows what is good behavior and whereas what is bad behavior. Number two is monitoring. Now, this can be termed as evaluation of the behavior or keeping an eye on the behavior that one wants to control or regulate. The next important factor is the strength. Now, strength also can be explained in terms of willpower. Now, willpower has been termed as an important factor in effective self regulation. So, though there can also be deprivation of willpower as it is used, individuals can be trained to strengthen their willpower, which in turn can lead to effective self regulation. Now, this self regulation can be developed, and some of the techniques of this self regulation are, um, are, for example, the cultivating self awareness and the self monitoring. That means cultivating the self awareness can also help in developing the self regulation. As the individuals, they become more and more aware about their strength and as well as their weaknesses. Now, the number two is the cognitive reappraisal. Now, this mainly involves the modification of thinking pattern. That means the positive emotions, experiencing any positive emotions. Or, for example, if a student obtains less marks in an examination, rather than thinking that she is not good enough, she can think in terms of putting in more efforts next time. Number three is the mindfulness. It can be described as an ability to be self aware as well as being present about where one is or what he or she is doing. The positive attitude, it is another factor which is developing a positive attitude towards any type of situations or events or maybe people, objects, etc. Developing this self regulation. Next one is the stress management. Now, the effective management of the stress can also help in self regulation. When an individual is able to manage stress, she or he will feel in better control for herself or himself. That means the thoughts and the feelings can be controlled by that person. Whereas the time management. Now, being stress management or besides this stress management, time management techniques may also help in self regulation. The techniques like setting priorities, having a planner, having clear goals, and so on can help to manage effectively. Now, self enhancement. Like self regulation, self enhancement is another important, understanding, intelligent, and industrious. Now, there are several related terms such as this self improvement, self assessment, self verification, and self protection. Now, what does this self improvement mean? It can be explained as a motive to make oneself better, whereas the self enhancement can be explained as a motive that is focused on perception that one is better, so which may or may not be compatible with reality. This self assessment can be described as a motive that focuses on securing a precise perspective about oneself that can be positive or negative. And what is this self verification mean? Now, self enhancement is self verification, that is, verifying notions that an individual held about himself or herself previously, that can be positive or negative. Lastly, what is this self protection? Now, this self enhancement thus can be related with self protection motive, where individuals involved in creating a positive self image in order to protect oneself. Thus, an individual will modify his or her behavior based on whether it is appreciated or not by people around him or her, especially the significant people in his or her life. Not all the people, but the significant people. Now, so uh, in this aspect, another important thing is the SEM, that is the self evaluation maintenance model. So, in this model, it states that generally social comparisons are carried out when there is a likelihood of it leading to any positive self evaluations. Now, the social the social comparison can be categorized into upward social comparison and downward social comparison. Now, what happens in the upward social comparison? The individual will compare his or herself with an individual who is better than him or her, whereas the downward social comparison, such as comparison, is carried out with an individual who is weaker than the individual. So, social comparison is also carried by an individual with her own former selves. Now, there are various techniques that people use to enhance their selves. What are they? Biased hypothesis testing, the breadth of categorizing, self serving bias, self handicapping, false consensus effect, and false uniqueness. So, these are the main factors of this motivation chapter or unit. Now, the next unit covers the creativity. Now, what does this creativity means? The creativity, it actually, according to some psychologists, there are various definitions, but Newell, Shaw, and Simon in 1963 they have suggested the four criteria of creativity. What are they? Number one, it has novelty and usefulness, either for the individual or the society. Number two, it demands that we reject ideas we had previously accepted. Three, it results from intense motivation and persistence. Four, it comes from clarifying a problem that was originally vague. Now, according to the famous definition by McKinnon in 1963, the true creativeness fulfills at least three conditions. It involves a response or an idea that is novel or at the very least statistically infrequent. But novelty or originality of thought and action, while a necessary aspects of creativity, is not sufficient. So it must to some extent be adaptive to or of reality. So it must serve to solve a problem, fit a situation, or accomplish some recognizable goal. Thirdly, the true creativeness it involves a sustaining of the original insight and evaluation and elaboration of it, a developing of it to the full. Now, like these definitions, there were many other definitions. Now, the next part is the aspects of creativity. What are the aspects of creativity? Now, according to Guilford, this creativity it involves the divergent thinking in contrast to the convergent thinking. Now, what is this divergent thinking? This divergent thinking is having divergent ideas and possibilities, whereas for example, think of how many ways you can use a brick, and the next one is the uh, so divergent thinking is this. Now usually we do not think beyond any instructions, so the instructions have not mentioned that one cannot extend beyond the dots. So if there are some dots given in the book or paper in a blank sheet, then we can think that there are some lines, and we can also think of any balls, etc. So it is up to us to think that what type of uh, things are or objects are defined by some dots. So, thus, one of the key aspects of this creativity is divergent thinking, and it consists of four processes or aspects such as fluency, flexibility, originality, and elaboration. Now, fluency it refers to how rapidly the person comes up with ideas, whereas flexibility it refers to the ability to produce a large variety of ideas such as thinking, etc. Originality it refers to the uniqueness or novelty of the ideas, whereas elaboration involves the ability to develop and describe an idea such as consequences of a hypothetical event, etc. Now, there are some important stages of this creativity. What are they? According to Graham Ball's 1926, there are four stages in creativity. Number one, the preparation. Two, incubation. Three, inspiration, and 4, verification. So, what is this preparation? This is the first stage when the person in this stage tries to understand the problem or plan the problem, that how he or she will proceed. Now, incubation, this is the timeout phase where the individual does not engage in any type of activity. After that comes the inspiration. That means after the incubation stage, the person suddenly gets an insight about the solution of the problem, and the verification, it is the last stage where the person then tries to evaluate and verify the ideas and the solution in this stage. There are some approaches to creativity. Number one, the psychoanalytic approach, the behavioristic approach, the cognitive approach, and the humanistic approach and differential approaches. Then comes the investment and the confluence theory. Now, this psychoanalytic approach, the first approaches that is mentioned by Sigmund Freud, it views the creativity as the sublimation of drives or of wish fulfillment. Whereas this behavioristic school or approach to creativity mainly focuses on forming new or novel connections and associations between the stimuli and the responses. This cognitive approach, it focuses on the cognitive processes like attention, memory, flexibility in learning, etc. Then the humanistic approach. It views the creativity in terms of self-actualization as proposed by Maslow. The differential approaches to creativity, it focuses on the 4 P's, capital P. That means of creativity, that means the person, number 1, number 2, the process, number 3, the product, and 4, the press. So these are the 4 P's of creativity described or focused by these differential approaches. Now, this is highlighted in the definitions of this creativity by Plucker, Bagetto, and Doe in 2004. Now, after this, the investment and the confluence theory of creativity was proposed by famous psychologist Sternberg in 2006. Now, in this theory, this theory states that the creativity is a confluence of 6 resources such as intellectual skills, knowledge, thinking styles, personality, motivation, and environment. Now, what are the correlates of this creativity, or correlates of creativity are mainly uh, creativity and intelligence. This creativity and intelligence relationship has been widely researched, and the threshold hypothesis has been prominent. So, it actually states that the high intelligence does not guarantee creativity, but a certain level of intelligence is required in order to be creative. Now, according to this Sternberg and O'Hara in 2000, they proposed 5 possible relationships between this creativity and intelligence. What are they? The creativity as a part of intelligence, number 1. Number 2, the intelligence as a part of creativity. And 3, the creativity and intelligence viewed as identical sets. Next one is the creativity and intelligence as independent but overlapping constructs. And the last one is the creativity and intelligence as completely unrelated states. So these were the relationships between creativity and intelligence. Now, creativity and personality. This is another important uh, um, form of this creativity. Now, personality traits of creative individuals mainly covers the verbally fluent person who can express their ideas well to others. Number two, values own independence and autonomy. Three, they enjoys engaging in intellectual matters. Next one, they has wide variety of interests. Next, they have unconventional thinking, prefers to think in new ways, has aesthetic values, bold and courageous, and willingly takes risks and faces challenges. So, creativity cannot be explained only with intelligence, that we have already seen. Now, the what are the assessment of creativity? How it can be assessed? This creativity can be assessed by some divergent production test. It is based on Guilford's theory of intelligence, and the stages are the operation of the divergent production in his model that we have already covered in the previous section. And this divergent production test battery, it consists of many tests like Guilford's battery in Torrance test of creative thinking. It is the TTCT. Then it consists of some verbal test like thinking creatively with words. Some have three figure tests like thinking creativity with some pictures. Then Baker Mehdi test is adapted version of Torrance test of creative thinking. Another important test is the remote associate test of Medinick's. It is based on their view of creativity as the ability to see their relationship between ideas that are remote from each other. Another important test is Passy-Usha test of creative problem solving, that is PUTCPS. It was developed by B.K. Passy and Usha Kumar in 1996. It is a measure of creative problem solving in children as well as adults. Now, there are some ways to enhance this creativity. What are they? Be respectful to unusual questions. Be respectful of imaginative and creative ideas. Show your students that their ideas have value. Occasionally, have students do something for practice without the threat of evaluation. Then tie in evaluation with causes and consequences. And obviously, the most important one is to encourage the self initiated learning and evaluate it. So, this is all about this assessment of this creativity. Now, how to enhance this creativity? There are some principles for fostering this creativity, like introduce a variety of instructional materials needs to be used to facilitate different forms of student expression, then develop a favorable attitude towards creative achievement, provide encouragement, foster the creative abilities of children, provide reinforcement for engaging in creative work, and provide a supportive environment at school or in home. That means being self confident, sensitive, independent, and unconventional, etc. Now, there are some important techniques which are helpful for enhancing this creativity, like divergent thinking, brainstorming, uh, synectics, and De Bono's six hats method. It helps to view an issue or a problem from a number of different perspectives. So, the method involves wearing each hat mentally and thinking according to the characteristic features of each hat. So, this is the uh, how to enhance this creativity. So, this is all about this 103. So, I have covered the whole paper, and this creativity chapter, the intelligence chapter, the theories of intelligence, as well as the important theories of motivation are very important for the exam. Thank you for listening. Good night.